So yesterday I showed you this list of teams that were likely and unlikely to support the new Andretti Cadillac F1 team. Well, new information has come to light that paints a much more bleak picture. Let's get into it. So let's go back to the streets of Miami last year, the streets in which Michael Andretti was pounding to get signatures from F1 teams to support his entry process. Now, out of 10 teams, he only received 2 signatures, and those 2 signatures were from Alpine, who you guys learned on this channel has committed to supply Renault engines to the team if and when Andretti gets their Formula One approval. And the other signature was Andretti's business partner, Zach Brown, signing, of course, on behalf of the McLaren Formula One team. Now, later in the year, Red Bull attempted to get Colton Herta, who, of course, drives for Andretti Autosport in IndyCar and is the team, meaning Andretti Cadillac's front-running driver, to get Colton into an AlphaTauri car for the 2023 season. A move that Michael Andretti likely didn't resist as a good faith gesture to Christian Horner and Helmut Marko, hopefully to garner some support for his Formula One entry. That move, of course, fell through due to Herta's lack of super license points, but one would think that it would have at least reflected somewhat favorably for Michael Andretti and Red Bull. But now we reach today, where Michael Andretti has, of course, a couple of days ago announced the support of American car manufacturer General Motors of his Formula One program through their Cadillac brand. But this announcement has somehow ended in less support than Michael Andretti previously had from the teams in Formula One for an Andretti entry. As reported by The Race and aggregated by our friend Adam Stern of the Sports Business Journal, only one of the 10 current Formula One teams still support Andretti's Formula One entry, that being Alpine. And of course, you probably don't need this visual aid, but here it is. Here's what Andretti is now up against. Of course, Alpine is in support of this because it would give them another seat at the manufacturer's table by having another team be supplied by Alpine's Renault engines. Now, all of a sudden, the strong majority comment that was reported yesterday in Reuters makes a whole lot more sense. Curiously, of course, we know that Michael Andretti has the support of the FIA, whose Concord agreement with the 10 Formula One teams allows for as many as 13 teams on the Formula One grid. So it's quite curious to see the politics that have been going on between the FIA president and, of course, the teams themselves in regards to whether or not Michael Andretti deserves or will be granted a Formula One entry. And we've had lots and lots of articles written with lots of tasty tidbits. Motorsport.com had this. Rival teams in F1 itself have not been impressed by the way that Andretti has so publicly gone about trying to get support. They do not see the American manufacturer's plans being on the same level as what a full-on works efforts from an OEM would be. Of course, that's referring to General Motors and Cadillac. And then there was this from the BBC, which stirred up a lot of American race fans, which states, within F1, there's a general sense that many of those racing in America in categories where teams buy cars off the shelf and run them with fairly small-scale operations don't quite grasp just how high the level is in Formula One and how complex the task. Obviously, a direct shot at IndyCar racing, which Michael Andretti is most well known for competing in. Okay. The first thing I'm going to do, because as you can tell by my accent and probably by the way I look, I am indeed an American. And I'm going to have to defend American racing. Because, first of all, this quote from the BBC, there's a kernel of truth to it, which I will get to. But the vast majority of this is one of the most stuck-up things I've ever read. And for the most part, it's wrong. Now, most people have already pointed out the obvious example of the challenges of American racing when Formula One teams come and try to compete in it. And that is the 2019 Indy 500 attempt by McLaren and Fernando Alonso. They got bumped from the Indianapolis 500 starting grid. They were not one of the fastest 33 cars, and they went home. A budget that was at the time described as the highest of any of the 36 entries that attempted to compete in the race that year. So that budget and thousands of people working to get an Indy car into the Indianapolis 500, it didn't pan out. Now, are we saying that every Formula One team would have as big of a struggle as McLaren did that year? And certainly McLaren has now, jumped in with both feet and has a much more competitive program. Of course, they did what Michael Andretti was not allowed to do, and they purchased an existing team, which used to be known as Arrow Schmidt Peterson. It's now known as the Arrow McLaren Formula One team, or IndyCar team. Why did I say that? But yeah, that's the obvious example, right? But the second thing I have a contention on is this notion that American teams are incapable of designing or developing their own cars. The only thing that is preventing them from doing that are the rules that have been written specifically to ban development, to ban testing as much as possible. These teams are not that far removed when we're talking about the 120-year history of auto racing as a sport. So many American teams have, quote unquote, recently undergone design products. And yes, some of them are, from the very beginning of my lifetime, if you want to go back to the failed Rahal Hogan chassis. But thinking about like Team Penske, they designed their own car every year all the way up until 1999. Like, they had the capability to do that. A high-level champ car. This was not, we're not talking an Indy Lights car or something here. They were competing against 5 other chassis manufacturers. Yeah, 1999, 5 different chassis manufacturers in IndyCar. It's unfathomable today. How many engines were there? Like 4 or 5, 2 tire manufacturers. Again, unfathomable. But really, when we're looking at the history of auto racing as a whole, it wasn't that long ago that IndyCar racing was extremely similar to Formula One. And many of the teams, many of the crew members, certainly the car owners, were around when that stuff was happening, and at the time they handled it. Now, this is where Michael Andretti kind of kicked the ball into his own goal, so to speak, because, if the teams are using the fact that IndyCar is spec against Michael Andretti, well, unfortunately, and we have the quotes to prove it, there's several articles out there. I linked one of them on Twitter. Michael Andretti has been one of the most vocal people in IndyCar, one of the most vocal owners about reining in development, about reining in new cars, wants to keep the status quo, doesn't want to develop, doesn't want to spend the money to do that. And now, all of a sudden, he wants to jump into the development series in the world. And, I think quite rightly, in some ways, is being called out for his attitude stateside. And I understand, why IndyCar is the way it is and why it's certainly not going to be a development series to the level of Formula One. But this idea that the teams are incapable is just complete horse crap. And I thought that I rolled my eyes very hard on that. But I think the other legitimate point that has been made by the Formula One teams, although it describes many of them, is the fact that, I don't think car manufacturers should come into any series, frankly, whether we're talking Formula One or whatever, and badge somebody else's engine. Now that's, I'm going to leave a bit of a caveat there and say, for example, Chevy pays for Ilmor to build their IndyCar engine. I think that is okay, because, you don't have another, let's say Lotus comes in and badges the Chevy engine, so there's 2 teams running the same engine that are called different things. I think that's stupid, but that's exactly what's happening in Formula One, and that's exactly what Michael Andretti has suggested they're going to do, at least initially, with the Cadillac, is that they're going to put a Renault engine in the back of it and call the car a Cadillac, which, it's not exactly in the spirit of Formula One, but so many of the other teams are guilty of this. The Sauber team is currently running under the banner of Alfa Romeo. Well, guess what the engine is in the back of that? It's a Ferrari. Now, certainly there's a very close relationship between Alfa Romeo and Ferrari. There's no doubt about that. But the point remains the same. The most egregious team that has been responsible for a lot of this badging, at least in recent times, has been Red Bull. They've badged their car in Aston Martin. They've badged their engine at Tag Heuer. That's a watch company. They badged their engine, which was a Renault, by the way, as a Tag Heuer, a watch company. Okay, so like, I do agree with that criticism, right? But the problem is the Formula One teams don't follow that rule. And you want to talk about Ford? There's rumors about Ford coming into Formula One. Do you think they're going to build their own engine right off the bat? No, they're probably going to slap a sticker on the Red Bull. Porsche? What do you think they're going to do? Probably slap a sticker on, let's say, an Audi-powered car. Does that make sense? Probably. At least I guess they're under the same Volkswagen group. But that's what's going to happen. And this is what Formula One has already accepted as the norm. Whether it's legitimate or illegitimate doesn't matter. And I guess, to go back to the American racing point, one of the reasons I made the big deal about Bump Day and continue to make a big deal about Bump Day, in terms of top-level racing, and I'm not talking about midgets and sprint cars and all that stuff, because that's different, but that's not mainstream. Formula One teams probably have no idea what sprint car racing is. When we're talking top-level motorsport in the U.S., I'm talking IMSA, IndyCar, NASCAR. The fact that you have to qualify for the Indianapolis 500, the fact that no one is safe, is the most legitimate sporting thing that happens in this country. And it's more legitimate than Formula One. Formula One is a closed-door society, as we are finding out right now. You cannot just build a car for Formula One or buy one off the shelf from Dallara like you can for the Indianapolis 500. You do not have the capability to go Formula One racing unless all the teams, the FIA, Liberty Media, all of these people agree that you can come. The Indy 500 is a little bit easier. It's not as easy as it should be because the engine manufacturers have a lot to say about who gets an engine and who does not, and I think that needs to change, but that hasn't changed since 1979, so who thinks that's ever going to change in IndyCar racing? But it's a lot easier to go IndyCar racing than it is to go to Formula One racing. So if you want to go to the Indy 500, you can compete with McLaren. You can compete with Andretti. You can compete with Penske. If I hit the lottery tomorrow, I would enter a team. Like, I could do that. Nothing would stop me if I had the funds to do so. Andretti has the funds to go to Formula One, and he's being stopped right now. The comment about the teams being mad about Michael talking to the media and doing a lot of publicity to try to get support is a funny one, especially if if you haven't been in a racing paddock before, or you kind of do what I do, where you talk about people or talk about what people are doing. I will say this, especially at the very top of racing, egos are so easily bruised. And if you have the support of the public, or you have the capability to have the support of the public, or at the very least you can get a message out there, you will bruise egos very quickly. And those egos at the top are very easily bruised. And it does not surprise me in the least bit that the team bosses of Formula One are not happy that Michael Andretti is going out there and saying, hey, we checked all the boxes. We want to come to Formula One. Hey, why aren't you letting us in Formula One? Because then they have to deal with the criticism, and they don't like the criticism. So I understand that part and empathize with Michael, because I think he's trying to get support, and I think you should try to get support. I think you should say, hey, I want to do this. Hey, this is how we're going to do it. And let the court of public opinion decide of whether or not you should be able to do it. The final couple of things is why Zach Brown bailed. I think that was surprising to some people. It surprised me a little bit, for sure. But once I thought about it for about 5 seconds, it made sense. And that's what's sitting in the back of Zach Brown's McLarens in Formula One. It's a Mercedes engine. Why wouldn't Mercedes? Well, Mercedes was already against Andretti. I mean, we know Toto Wolff has been one of the most vocal of the team principals that do not want Michael Andretti in Formula One. But think about the showroom competition. Mercedes and Cadillac certainly compete against each other on the showroom in the luxury car division, especially in the United States. And the fact that those two brands would be in Formula One and already kind of poking the bear with Toto doesn't like the idea of Andretti coming to Formula One, and now you're going to call it a Cadillac? Hey, Zach, who's supplying your engines? Right. That's probably why Zach, unfortunately, has rescinded his support of Andretti. So, yeah, this is a wild, wild thing. You've already let me know, I'm sure, down in the comments what you think. I think it's going to be pretty heated, but it should be a fun read. Thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe for more motorsport content. This has been David Land on YouTube. I'll see you in the next video.